Good morning, neighbors. How are you? Welcome and welcome back to your open mic program, middle of the week Wednesday, more than halfway through the month of January. It's the 18th of the first month of the year 2017. I'm Dan Mitchell, your host. Welcome to your open mic program. You can participate by calling in at 357-1290. You can also try to email Dan at WKBKradio.com. We've already been having very, very good discussions this week. We appreciate it. This hour, we are dedicating our time to the Keene Board of Education, the upcoming not one but two sessions of the annual school district meeting and issues that are before the Keene Board of Ed right now. Its chairman, Ed Murdough, is with us in the studio. If you have a question or a comment regarding the articles on the warrant, you can join us again at 357-1290. There was a public hearing last night, and they did hold it despite the weather. Had they canceled it, it would have caused a lot of problems for scheduling the next one in time before the first session in February. And there's all the rules that the state has about, you know, getting the advertisements and the notices, and it causes headaches. So they opened it. A few people showed up, and they recessed it, which means it's the same meeting, but it will be continued at another date and time. Ed Murdough is with us. Nice to have you here. Good morning.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you.
How are the roads coming in?
Oh, not bad.
Yeah?
Not bad.
Yeah? Should they have canceled school? Nah, that's never mind. You don't have to answer that. It's finals at Keene High. And the first time I've ever heard any of my children say, gosh, I hope there's not a snow day. I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, I got all these finals, and then they'll move them around, and it'll screw everything up. So it's tough when it's finals. About the meeting last night, so some people did show up for the hearing.
We did. We had a few, and I think we had 3, maybe 4 people that actually commented.
Oh, good, good, okay. Yeah. Despite the weather. But now it's been recessed, so you can continue and give other folks a chance to go when the weather hopefully is better.
That's right. And so we're going to continue the meeting next Wednesday, January 25th. It'll be at 7 p.m. At Keene High School. Don't have the exact room identified yet because we have to look at the scheduling of the auditorium and so forth, but we'll have a suitable room for people to do that. So next Wednesday at 7 will be the continuation of our public hearing.
Okay, and again, this is a public hearing basically where you go through the steps of the different articles on the warrant. You talk a lot about the budget presentation.
Right. We're required by law to hold a public hearing on the budget. Right. And if we had any bonds, we'd also have to hold a public hearing on those. We do not have any bonds this year. But we also go through the warrant articles so people can comment on anything that will be brought to the deliberative session, which is on Saturday, February 11th.
Right. Right, and this is the one that used to, for lack of a better way of describing it for folks who don't know, back when there used to be just that one meeting on a Saturday where people could to take various articles, they could amend, they could add, subtract from various budget lines, so on and so forth. It was a long day. Along comes the Australian ballot, the official ballot system, and now there are 2 meetings. But that is the meeting on Saturday, February 11th, starting at 9 o'clock, where people can, if they want to, add or subtract to articles on the warrant. Then in March, when people get together on Tuesday the 14th, they actually just vote. You know, there's no more.
Correct. And this year, I should say, in March, all wards will be voting at the Rec Center on Washington Street.
Right, because not as many people vote. It's not like the rush that we have during the other elections, is it?
I wish I could say no to that, but we do follow the polling from year to year and identify what's needed. And then there is a cost because we do pay the poll workers, and it takes some time to set up the polls and so forth. So I think we did this last year too. Yep. The year before, I think we were down to 2 locations. So talking with the city clerk and the other folks, we determined that this is the best way to do the school meetings.
Based on participation, it saves money. You don't need all those other locations. So eventually you could just have it in the back room at the pub or something. You know, that many people or that few people show up.
No, I think we'll do it at the Rec Center.
That's only partially tongue-in-cheek. You know what I'm saying? Because nobody... I know. And every year you're here, and we have other people on from the school board and the SAU, and I always get on about the official ballot. But it is a shame that more people don't participate when we're talking about $66,150,293. That's Article 1 that the district would raise. This is the general operating budget. It's a little bit less than last year's, right?
No, it's a little bit more. It's about 1.7% increase.
Okay.
Yeah.
The default budget is a little bit more, but that's only because I had to add some other things in that were passed a part of last year.
Right. And again, as I think I explained last year, when you're trying to cut things, the default budget is going to end up being more because all the things that we cut stay in the default budget. And a lot of people don't understand that. People get angry sometimes when the default budget shows up being more than the proposed budget. Well, what that means is that the the entity, be it a school board or a town, is actually trying to keep the cost down.
Right.
And the default budget being last year plus all of the obligated contractual things and so forth is going to be higher.
Right. If all of a sudden you have fewer employees the next year, or some higher paid teachers retire, that money was put into the previous year's budget. That money has to be part of that budget.
Right.
But isn't it true that the school board doesn't, if for whatever reason they chose the default budget, I can't see that happening because it's more money. The school board, you'd have to raise the money, and people would have to be taxed on it, but they wouldn't necessarily have to spend it, which means there's a better opportunity at the end of the year for unencumbered funds to help reduce taxes for the next coming year.
Yes, I'd say so. Yeah.
So that the school board wouldn't have to say, well, we passed it, we'd spend it for last year. You'd have to do that this year. We're going to talk about this year's budget. You mentioned that it's up about 1.5%, but you also mentioned cuts and understanding a tight budget. Remember, when we talk about budgets, it's about spending, but it's also about revenue. And dependent upon how much revenue you have before you start to tax people, that's how they help set the tax rate. And we'll talk about that in a second. If you do want to call with a question, 357-1290. Ed Murdough is here. He's chairman of the board, and we have a person on the phone line. We welcome you and say good morning. You're on Open Mic.
Good morning. How are you today?
We're very well, thank you.
Good. My recollection is the Jonathan Daniels School was closed, and we can go back into all the history about all the plans that there were for the Jonathan Daniels School. Some board members back then had suggested that it would be torn down. Others suggested it was going to be used for storage. But what really happened, is what we knew was going to happen, was an opening of a nursery school. And, that does place some competition for other nursery schools in the...
Is it a nursery school or a preschool? Or is there a difference?
Well, the official title is preschool.
Okay.
Yeah. I think nursery school is an older term.
Right. Okay.
Right. So we now have a preschool, and
we've always had a preschool. We have for quite a while, because it was set up based upon federal regulations for special needs people, where the age gap was that we had to provide for them. But if somebody in the private sector, just a regular citizen, wanted a kid to go there, they'd have to pay for it. Is that correct, Ed?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's basically a special needs type of preschool as mandated by the federal government.
And so anybody sending their child there would pay market rate, or would they pay below market rate in competition to other market providers?
Well, so as Dan said, we're required to provide services to children with special needs beginning at age 3.
Right.
And oftentimes that's the best way to do that is to operate a preschool. So, and that's required by federal law. So we do provide the preschool for those children. Those families do not pay. Okay.
But families who do pay, do they pay below market rate?
I would have to check. I think we might be a little bit below the average in the town, but I don't know.
I could say at least yes for some of them, because there are some high-end ones in town that we know are pretty expensive to send their kids to. And on the other side, of course, there are ones that are less. But if he can get the numbers of somebody at the SAU could send those along. I'd be curious about that too, caller.
And then the other question I had was, as a result of closing down Jonathan Daniels School, across the school district, my understanding is there was a consolidation at the elementary level that resulted in the elimination of approximately, and you can correct me on this, 33 positions, correct?
That sounds about right, yes. Over 2 years.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And over the course of those years, the elimination of those, we had that savings spent on architectural improvements or updating to buildings, the remaining elementary schools, correct?
That's our plan, and that's ongoing. So we've done it for 2 years, but we intend to keep doing that until we've got the work completed.
Okay, and so we also continue to increase our spending. So as a result, the savings really aren't there. We've decided to find other areas for increasing either spending on improvements to buildings, or increasing in pay rates with negotiated contracts. So I just want to make sure that the taxpayers cannot expect the spending to go down, even though we've eliminated 33 positions. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct, and I don't think we ever said that the spending would go down. We'd had savings. So from the beginning, the plan was to reduce the number of elementary classrooms because our student population has gone down, and redirect that money into needed repairs. So it's more of a cost avoidance. Yes, you can say that we don't have savings, but we would be spending even more because these repairs are necessary. A number of them have been mandated by the Keene Fire Department. We had a boiler in Fuller School that was installed in 1962 that we finally were able to replace. So this is all work that we would need to do.
But we also, with regard to, there was a warrant a couple of years ago that separated out the kind of engineering for boiler replacement and everything into a separate budget. We've tabbed out all these other budgets, and we fill those with overages, is my understanding. So when we look at the budgets, there are budgets that are raised by taxes, and any overages go into these other special budgets to pay for improvements on boilers and such. But I just wanted to articulate the fact that we stand here with our hands out and our heads held high in the air, saying, "Hey, nobody shows up to these meetings." The reason is that there are a lot of people who want to cut spending in the district, and if they go and they see that they cannot do that, then why attend? This is the problem that we have in City Hall too, is that there are people who want to see spending cuts, and the city never looks at the areas where we can cut spending, and so nothing can be done, and so the people throw their hands up in the air and they walk away. So that's the answer as to why nobody shows up.
Don't you think
nothing can be done?
No, that's just lazy.
Well, now I'm just saying that's the perception. That's the perception. If you deny that,
that's lazy.
Prove to me otherwise.
That's lazy.
Prove to. Well,
That's lazy.
I'm just articulating to you.
It's the same people who also say that, if 100 teachers show up, they can get anything they want passed in the budget. Well, here's the thing. Get off your ass, go out there and vote, and get 200 of your friends to show up. That's the way they used to do it. I don't think you lived here back before the official ballot, did you? Where there were so many people that attended.
Me lazy.
No. Oh, believe me.
Lazy.
You're the last person I would call lazy. I think you show more due diligence in helping out the community than most other people. But were you here at a time when not only would they fill the gymnasium, all the seats on the basketball floor, both sets of bleachers, and then fill the cafeteria and the large group instruction area with people standing in the hallway? That's how many people used to attend the meeting. Now you can fit all of them in Dunkin' Donuts.
Well, I can tell you that the people that I know and the people that I see are very busy. And so I don't pretend to suggest that anybody's lazy. I would not characterize that. But I have talked to a lot of people who say nothing, like they feel as though with their obligations to their family and to their kids' sports and to their jobs and to everything else going on in their lives, there are a lot of people who throw their hands up and go, "Why would I go to that?" Nothing could be. I've seen time and time again, the spending is never changed.
Yeah.
They always get what they want, and these are the same people. I would say they're lazy for not turning out to the voting booth.
Yeah,
because that is simple.
And again, the only difference between now and then is the meetings were longer. You had to devote a lot more of your time. And at that time, they did make change. I remember when school teachers' contracts were turned down. I remember when operating budgets were not passed. I remember when operating budgets were decreased. I also remember at times when they were increased. None of that happens now, I think, and I may be wrong, but because of the system. We all have jobs, we all have families, we all have obligations. I live in a town where we didn't have one, two, we had 14 school district meetings to try to find a solution to our rundown school. In the course of 1 year, we packed the place every single time. Yes, we had jobs. Yes, some of us get up at 3 in the morning. Yes, some of us stayed there till 11:30 at night on weeknights for these meetings. That's the difference. One is a system where while you're there, you can have cause and effect, where the system you have now, you don't. I always appreciate your phone call. Ed has something to say. Maybe stay on the line, but.
Well, sir, I just wanted to mostly agree with Dan here. Things can be changed, but you have to show up to make the change. And unfortunately, in this country, we have government by those who show up, and majority rules of those who show up. So if we want to go back to the town meeting system, that can be done, but people have to come forward and propose that and vote that that's the way we want to go back and do it. But We try our best to meet all of the needs, to listen to the input that we get. You can write to us, you can email us, but we've got to have your input, and people have to show up to change the things that they don't like, and that's our system.
And by the way, the same holds true for city government in getting involved. It's a different form of government, given that you have the representation and the people that you vote into office making all the decisions. They don't have town meeting in Keene anymore. But it's the same thing. Show up. And by the way, that's a caller who's for a long time has been showing up and it is now serving the people in the capacity of a voted in or elected official. 357-1290, the number to call. I know that, and again, it happens every year, because it's an important subject to me as far as participation. Getting back to the Jonathan Daniels thing, just to be clear, and I know the caller understands it, but so other people can understand it, there were two ways to go about getting all the elementary schools fixed up, and one way was to take out a bond and do a lot of that. That didn't pass. That wasn't successful. So to come up with the revenue or a way to pay for all of the changes, you had to go looking for money. Could have had a bake sale, could have sold chocolate bars, could have had a lottery. They decided to close a school and use the money from the closure of the school to pay for those things. Had that not happened, and you still had to make all those fixes, in part because of rules and regulations and ordinances and fire safety and the ADA.
And time.
You would have all your regular spending plus that on top of it. So it's a matter of, just to throw a number out there, spending $40 million or spending $44 million. And still with the same end result, which is having fixed up schools. What ended up happening is they closed a school and got rid of the teachers and the positions that were in charge of it. Is it still a school? Is it still on the books? Are we still paying people to run the preschool? Yes, we are. And we do have those expenses.
And I'd just like to to pick up on what you mentioned to the caller, Dan. We have had a preschool for a very long time. Prior to 2 years ago, it was located in Wheelock School in very, very crowded conditions, and it was taking away space that Wheelock School needed for its K-5 students. So always part of the plan was to relocate the preschool somewhere other than Wheelock School. And it was considered being put in Jonathan Daniels. I actually had another proposal that we purchase a building and move it in there that did not pass the board. But that was always part of the plan, but it was always kind of on the side, and people forgot about it. People that were advocating to keep Jonathan Daniels open as an elementary school would have kept the preschool in Wheelock School in those bad conditions. So we always had that. We also had our community education, our adult education group. They were located in rental space on West Street down near Dunkin' Donuts. Again, not many people knew they were there. But that was rental space, expensive rental space, so they've also been relocated back into the Jonathan Daniels building. So for the time being, for the foreseeable future, we are going to continue to use the Jonathan Daniels building for the preschool, for the community education. So we eliminated rental space. We also moved our IT department out of an old farmhouse near Alumni Field and into the high school. So in the process, we've eliminated two buildings. And put the preschool in much better space, much more appropriate space than when it was in.
357-1290 if you want to join us on the program. You're next, and thanks for waiting. You're on Open Mic.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have a question about is the charge and fees of my child's use of any of the local school facilities. So, for instance, when we play football, we have to pay for field use of the high school. I kind of feel like this is almost a slap in the face because I'm being double taxed. Not only am I a citizen of Keene and I'm paying taxes for those facilities to be upkeep, we also get a surcharge tax when our children use these facilities. And it's not just football; it's wrestling, basketball, any type of use to these facilities in which we already pay our taxes on. It almost seems like I'm getting double taxed. I've tried to scour through the proposed documents, the proposals, to see how much it actually costs to go and cut a field, water the grass. And even if the youth organizations weren't using any of these outdoor fields that are being maintained by the school districts, I don't understand how much extra it would cost to do that. And as far as some of the football games and the rental of some of the stuff,
we should have a lot of the parents that are actually out there volunteering to clean up, take care of the stuff, take care of the fields and trash and stuff, far and above than anybody else is doing. Can you comment on why the need to charge extra on, or actually not charge, but double tax residents of the city for their children's use of facilities we already paid for?
Why does the school district charge for the use of the facilities when the taxpayers own the facilities?
Yeah, I'm absolutely glad to comment on that, and thank you for your question, sir. You are not being double taxed. That is a total misperception that people are being double taxed. The school facilities are publicly owned facilities. Some of them, particularly Alumni Field, was not paid for by the local taxpayers, so that's another story for another day. So they're there, they're available for the taxpayers. The school budget only includes the necessary funds to operate those fields for school activities. Now, we last year had a significant study of our outside fields done by a professional organization. Gave us a lot of information. We know how much it costs, and we know how much those other organizations cause us to cost. And it's not so much that the grass needs to be mowed more often, but it's the wear and tear. On the outside fields, it's the wear and tear of those fields. It's redoing the lines on a football field, for example, or on a baseball field. It is trash, and it's not the people picking up the trash, it's dumping the dumpster more often because your activities are there putting more in the dumpster. So we can go through that. Certainly you can contact the Buildings and Grounds Department, and they can give you all the details of every single cost. We've gone to the point of separately metering lights so that we can tell how much your game costs in terms of electricity. And we are not trying to make money. We're charging the people for the money, the extra costs that their activities cause. When it's inside...
So can I ask you...
Sure, go ahead.
Do you mind me if I ask a question? Why don't you bulk up the tax stream to allow these organizations to not have to deal with that? And the reason why I'm saying that is I wouldn't mind paying an extra couple of dollars per thousand if it implied that we take more kids off the street and get their pride in Keene, get their pride in themselves. We've got an issue going on here of, opioid epidemic, and what's the best way to keep kids off the street? Getting them involved, give them that pride, that sense of joy of being something part of a bigger organization.
So, caller, you're asking just what would it take to just increase the budget enough to cover what all of these different teams are paying now? Let's say it's $10,000 a year. Increase the budget by $10,000. That would basically cover the fees that you're all paying now, so that you wouldn't have to charge your families more to participate in the sport. Do I have that right?
Yes, agreed.
Okay, so would this be a matter of, by the way, if you had your old-fashioned school district meeting, you could stand up at the meeting and say, I propose to increase the budget by $10,000 for the purpose of reducing the fees paid by teams that use the school's athletic fields.
And you could
do that at the first session, too, by the way, caller.
Yeah. You could
do you mind telling me when the first session is?
February 11th, 9 a.m. at Keene High School.
Have it written out or typed out because you'll need to hand it to the moderator, but you can make that proposal and they'll vote right there whether or not to add that to the budget. So that people know some history, back when they did it the old-fashioned way, they wanted a lacrosse team for Keene High School. They didn't have one. They added it as an article on the warrant that day for X amount of dollars to start a lacrosse club. They debated it, they agreed, they added the money, and now they have a lacrosse team.
And the voters supported.
And the parents, it was the parents who introduced it. That's how it works.
And if I could, Dan, just to answer this from the school board's perspective, what you're saying is absolutely correct. But the question is that the job of the schools? Is that the job of the community? So, I mean, you say you're willing to pay. Do the majority of the citizens of Keene feel the same way? The previous caller wanted us to spend less money. So as a school board, we're looking at this and we're saying, yes, this is a worthwhile thing to do, but do we risk the school budget by increasing it that amount and have people vote the whole budget down, in which case the default budget would be less. Some people might very well say, we'll go with the default budget, and then the money wouldn't be there. So it's a question of what does the community want to do, and how does the community want to do it? We work very closely with the City Recreation Department on these issues, too. In fact, we had a meeting not too long ago with the mayor and the city manager and the rec director, and we're all concerned about the availability of recreational spaces and activities for the children in Keene, and it's just a question of how do we provide it, who pays for it, what's the best way to do it.
And here's a good example. If you get all the parents, the mom and the dad, that's 2 votes right there, as long as they're taxpayers in the city, to show up at the meeting to support your amendment, you might get it passed. And again, you may only need 100 people, seriously, to show up on that Saturday. And if you have more questions about it, we could talk about it more on the air tomorrow. I'm happy to help you out because I've been part of that with my own school district and what we do for various funding, and I know the history of what's happened in the city of Keene too. But it's worth a shot, right? I'm not sure if he's still there or not, but it's easier than you think, and it's real easy to ask for an amendment to increase or decrease a budget. You just need to have the people there to vote on it or support it. Ed Murdough is here with us, chairman of the Keene Board of Education. We'll get back to your phone calls in a moment. There are other articles, and a lot of them are fairly confusing and involve, the AREA agreement. The budget has increased by 1.5%. How come? Why? What's that additional money being spent on?
It's basically our contractual obligations. We had about 1.7 million of obligations when we started, increases from things that we have to do, and it is past contracts. We are receiving less money from the state in retirement. Our health insurance is projected to be up about 16%. So all that total up to about 1.7 million, and we reduced it about $500,000 of that. We did reduce it in making the actual budget. So that's what it's being spent on. There's really very little extra, if you will, in the budget. Probably there's no extra in the budget. There's less. We cut our professional development significantly in order to get costs down.
All right. What about a loss of teachers beyond those who are retiring? Any positions being cut at any of the particular schools, not just for budgetary reasons, but also maybe because we know that enrollment is down in some of the schools?
Yes. We're not eliminating any classrooms this year. We're down to 60 classrooms. We had 72 a few years ago. We're down to 60 classrooms, and that looks like the foreseeable future we'll be doing that. We are taking a look at our special education program. Not a place you look to save money, but we're looking at whether or not we're really providing the services that we should be providing for the cost. There is a proposal to eliminate a couple positions there. But basically, we're not making the big elimination of positions that we have for the last 2 years as we closed the school.
What about the revenue side?
Revenues are down about almost $1 million.
How come?
It's partly declining enrollment, and it's partly the state changing to the aid that they provide us. But what many people don't understand, and I try to talk about all the time, is most of the money that comes from sources other than local taxes is based on some count of students, be it free and reduced lunch, total number of students, and what have you. And people talk about the cost per pupil as though that's really a meaningful number, that if one person leaves, one student leaves, you save that much money. If one more comes in, it costs that much money. And of course, that's not true.
Classroom's still open, the teacher's still there.
Right. Unless you have enough students come or go in the same grade to change the number of classrooms, there's really no significant savings as enrollment goes down. But our revenues, being based on that cost per pupil, do go down.
All right. So how much are we not getting from the state this year that we got last year in the city of Keene?
Okay, let me find on my page here. So total, it's about $800,000.
$800,000. How much of that has to do with this transitional grant? The amount of money, the 4% less that going back to cities and towns.
That's the bulk of it. And if I could take a minute to speak on that,
Okay.
If people don't understand that, and there's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of thought that the state is reneging on their on a promise. Well, what happened several years ago when the state met the requirements of the court to define an adequate education, and there's a lot of argument about that definition, but they did, and the court was satisfied, and then pay the cost of it. That resulted, as all the previous changes to the formula did, in some big winners and some big losers in the communities around the state. Keene, we were a loser. So to try to alleviate that or spread the pain out, they created these transitional grants, which at the time I felt were illegal, and sooner or later it went to court and they were determined to be illegal. So they passed a law and they said, this is how we're going to pay for education, but then they didn't do it because they didn't want to hurt some towns and then other towns would benefit. So what happened was, led by Dover, some of the communities that were losing money, that were entitled to more money that they weren't getting, they sued and they won. So now they have to get what they were entitled to get. And now the state's going to ramp down these transition grants, stabilization grants, right, for the next couple of years until we get what we're supposed to be getting. So, any
discussion about through the Keene Board of Ed and therefore through the city of Keene and the city council people about joining Franklin and some of these other communities to start to put together another lawsuit because the adequacy is less than $4,000 per student in the state of New Hampshire, and we know on average it's between $12,000 and $15,000. Is there talk right now about?
Well, we've not had serious talk about doing that in a couple of years. We did talk. It was last year about the other thing the state's reneged on is building aid, which is the program I used to run, and they have not paid for any new construction. So all this construction work that we're doing, the repair work that's necessary that we have to do, in the past we would have been getting reimbursed 30 to 50% of that reimbursed by the state, and that's not happening now either. And we looked at that, but what we found was just not enough interest, and our legal advice was that things have changed in Concord, and we probably were not going to be successful
to win
forward
right now. 357-1290. We appreciate you, the listeners on the phone lines, giving us the extra time so we can at least talk a little bit more about Article 1, which is the general operating budget. As we have time this morning, we'll talk about some of the other articles. One does include a negotiated contract, collective bargaining. We'll get to that. That's Article 2. WKBK, thanks for waiting. You're on the radio. Good morning.
Morning, Danny. How you doing?
We're doing well. What's on your mind?
Good. Hey, I've got 3 topics, and I'll throw them out. I've got solutions for 2, and 1 I don't, and then throw them out for people to think about. First is, years ago, we kept being told before we put the big addition on the high school and the middle school that enrollment was going to increase, birth rates at the hospital were increasing, and we were told that by folks within the system. To solve self-serving in the future, maybe we ought to outsource that to an independent source that does demographic studies for the area, because we've been losing students since 1970. So that's my first issue, that maybe we should look at future long-range planning on student count to an outside source, outside the education system. Second is, wouldn't we want to, I agree with the caller that called before that wanted to get kids off the street. The most inexpensive and effective way to do that is intramural activities, sports, arts and crafts, things like that, after school, so the school becomes a community, and the kids have a reason to stay there. Football games Friday night, you have the Rotary Club or service organizations put on a chicken barbecue as a little bit of a fundraiser, do it real cheap. You get the community at the school. I don't know why we are so resistant to intramural sports, other than there's no support within the education system for it. Third thing that I don't know how to solve is, if Dan Mitchell is going to vote on his own raise, he's going to show up at a meeting, but somebody else that's going to be mildly affected will not show up. So when we have people voting on their own raise, it's the city, the employees of the school district will all show up to vote, no question about it. The public in general does not have the same impetus to go vote. I don't know how you solve that, but that is a problem with public employees voting on their own salaries. So those are my 3 issues. I'll just throw them out to you guys.
Well, I appreciate it. And thanks an awful lot. Very good questions and points. And again, we can continue to talk more about them tomorrow, including, if you have a 2-person household voting, one of them's a teacher, they're voting on their contract for their raises. What you need to do in the neighborhood, if you're afraid your property taxes are too high, you and your spouse go, you negate their vote, whether it's 100 teachers, families, or 200 showing up. You're talking about a half of one neighborhood in the city of Keene that needs to turn out, and they're simply not turning out. It is about turnout, and that's why I made the statement about lazy. What about, because I've heard it from him and some other folks too, about intramural. And again, you'd have to expand because you need to pay coaches, and there's already the facilities. It's hard. I coached softball at the high school last year, and it was tough to find some space. But, you know, whether you're talking about athletics or just clubs or groups in Marlborough, we have the after-school program. Mm-hmm. What about after-school programs in Keene, whether it's intramural sports or anything else, so the kids have something to do after school?
Yeah, well,
it's not cheap.
Well, I mean, we have a very extensive extracurricular activity program at all of our schools, actually. In intramurals in particular, the middle school has a fantastic intramural program.
Yeah. Why not at the high school?
You know, there's some at the high school, but at the high school you've got more interscholastic sports. You've got people going off for jobs and so forth. Again, we can do all these things. You mentioned finding space, the study that we did, and we're more fortunate than many, many other school districts. We've got a lot of field space in the Keene School District. But what we found is we're just about maxed out.
Yeah.
And we were surprised. We found the middle school is maxed out already. We didn't think so. So this group, they had a formula to determine how many events should be held on a field in a year in order to keep it from just spiraling down. And we're at a comfortable place, but there's not a lot of extra room. Again, any of these things are good things to do, but there's a cost. If you're going to have employees do it, then you're going to have to pay them to be there. Volunteers are great if people want to do that, but somebody's got to organize that. There's many, many things that can be done if you're willing to put in the effort, if you're willing to put in the money to do it. And the school district would certainly be happy to participate in any of that.
Yeah, and they do have after-school activities, at least for younger kids, at the rec department, and that's very low cost, too.
Yes.
Their after-school program is actually remarkably inexpensive. He also mentioned, though, about studies and the projections for enrollment, and maybe and who usually does those predictions, and what about farming that out? City of Keene, meaning the city government, is more than happy to farm a lot of stuff out. To hire consultants and
yeah, well, actually, there are several organizations around the country, around New England, that do that, and the last one we got was done by a group that's called the New England School Development Council. That's the kind of thing they do. We work with the planning department. I wouldn't have mentioned to the caller, he mentioned 1970, and that's very interesting. That was the peak of elementary enrollment in Keene. The peak of the baby boom was 1959, and 11 years later, that's where those kids were. We had 9 elementary schools. But the comment that enrollment's been going down since then is not actually true. If you look at our enrollment, you can pick it out very clearly, the waves. So you had the baby boom, peaked in 1970. About 20, 25 years later, you had the children of the baby boom. So there was a time in there when people said, enrollment's going down, and all of a sudden it started going back up again. It was the children of the baby boomers. I'm a boomer. And then it went down again. And then about around 2000, you could see the grandchildren of the baby boom. And if you look at the chart, it's so amazing. And all the other things that we talk about that we think are happening or not happening, it's really the baby boom and the ripples in the population that you can see that really matter. And there's a lot of debate. There's some wishful thinking on some people's point about enrollment going up or down, but it ripples as you go through, but those ripples are getting lower and more spread out as the further away we get from the baby boom. And we can look at all kinds of demographic activity. If you look at the population of Keene, it's been kind of a slow and steady increase since 1960. The number of houses in Keene, I think, if I remember right, there's about 1,000 more housing units in Keene today than there were in 1960. Not a big increase. And as we know, those are being occupied by older people, so it's a difficult thing. It's certainly not an art or a science to predict enrollment. All
right. Article 1 again is for $66,150,293. If that does not pass, they'll use the default budget, which is $66,277,986. According to the business manager for SAU 29 for the city of Keene, a home that is assessed at $175,000 would mean a hike of about $133 on his or her tax bill. In the time that we have left, we only have a few minutes. Article 2 has to do with a negotiated agreement with paraprofessionals and specialists. This is a 3-year deal?
It's a 4-year deal.
4-year deal.
Right.
And the first line item, I think, for the first the fiscal year is only $1. Can you explain a little bit about this, and then just
this is somewhat of an unusual employee agreement. This group previously was not unionized. They did have a collective bargaining agreement, so we had a collective bargaining agreement with them that still had another year to go. They unionized. We were required to renegotiate, which we did. So the raises in the first year were partially already in the budget. And they did agree the employees have been very good about agreeing to changes in their medical programs, and the net result is essentially a wash in the first year. So the employees are paying more for the medical. They are getting raises. They were already scheduled to get raises. So in the first year, there's really no change.
Okay. And the year after that, the raises are what, based on percentages, basically?
Right. They're about they're about 1.5% a year for the next 3 years. Yeah.
Each year for the next 3 years.
Right.
As far as that's concerned. Just to skip some of the articles in the middle, there are, like Articles 9 through Articles 11, there are certain funds that have been established to help ease the pain, so to speak, when money is needed for certain things. One is $50,000 for special education. If all of a sudden there's a family that moves into the district and more money is needed, that money could be available. There's a trust fund for the upkeep of the fields, including Alumni Field. And there's a trust fund. That would be a new fund, right? So that's
a new one.
That would be a new one. How much money would be added to that at first?
Well, we're just putting in $1 to establish the account. The expectation is that account will be filled with donations.
Okay.
But we need a place to put the money. And we're working with the new organization, the Keene Education Foundation, that's probably been on your show.
Yeah, Chris Coates
that are looking to raise money from donations to support the schools. One project is upgrades at Alumni Field, so this will give a place to put the money.
All right. Another one is $50,000 to be added to the school buildings maintenance fund. Again, a boiler blows or something like that. The money's available. So the AREA, these are agreements, and there are sending schools, Surrey and Sullivan. Some are for 6th grade, 7th and 8th, basically going to the Keene Middle School. Also, these students from those towns go to the high school. They currently have a different type of agreement than, say, Marlborough, Westmoreland, Chesterfield, that have been part of the district for a longer period of time. Why is this coming up? We only have a couple minutes. I apologize, Ed. But there are several articles. What happens if they pass? What happens if they don't? And in these towns, they're also voting on it similarly. So there's two moving parts here. But how are these agreements different from what's in place currently?
So in the 30-second response.
I'll give you all in like 3 minutes.
Okay, gee, thanks, Dan. The authorized regional enrollment agreement, AREA, is a very specific type of a contract between two school districts, and most of the towns that send their children to Keene are part of the AREA. It's been around for a long, long time, and there's a statute that describes it. But it's a 20-year long-term commitment by both districts to provide education to those children. The towns that are not part of that, they have a simple tuition agreement, a simple contract, which is much easier to cancel between the towns.
So the way Keene loses is we don't have that commitment.
Correct.
The way that these towns would benefit, they'd have to make a much bigger commitment, but they'd pay less.
We charge them more if they're not part of the ARA, because that pays for the risk that we have in saying you're going to send your children here. We're going to provide teachers and classrooms and all the other things that they could go away in 3 years if one party decided to cancel.
So to prevent buyer's remorse, these towns that aren't part of the the AREA could say, all right, we'll pay more, but that gives us the benefit of being able to leave kind of when we want. Bigger commitment, pay less, but the risk is covered by that longer commitment, that 20-year commitment.
Correct.
So if I am a voter in Sullivan, I have to vote, do we stay with what we got or go for the less expensive, longer commitment? So they have to agree to it, and the Keene voters have to say, we'll give up some of that money, but we'll have this commitment to know that we'll have Sullivan and Surrey as part of this too. They vote separately. That we'll have that commitment and they'll come.
Right. It's a different environment out there today. As we've been talking about declining enrollment, a few years ago, no one had space. And so if a town needed to send their children somewhere, they had to look around, and it was hard to find places to take their children. Well, that's changed. Now everyone has space. So
it's getting more competitive.
From a business point of view, we like their business because there's benefits of having the revenue and having the students. So you can provide more programs with more students and so forth. It benefits everyone. So we're doing this because we want to keep these towns with us.
And in order for that to happen, the town has to say yes, and the Keene taxpayers have to say yes.
Correct.
One vote no on in either town, either in Keene or say Sullivan or Surrey, negates it.
Correct.
Okay. Article 12 is whether or not they want to give the Board of Education authorization to lease or purchase any land that becomes available. Is there any land that's in the crosshairs right
now?
No,
we don't have anything in mind right now.
Okay. We covered a lot of ground and really good phone calls from the listeners, and I'd like to continue some of this tomorrow if we could. And I'd like to have you on more often, too, and we've done this in the past, and to start doing that, and maybe even on occasion to have Rob Millay from SAU 29 on to talk about some of these things, because I know there are a lot of issues coming up, and people want to talk about education. They want to talk about the process. They want to talk about kids having something to do after school and everything else. So it's important. The session next, the continuation of last night's meeting is when?
It's Wednesday the 25th, 7 p.m. at Keene High School.
And you can bring up more of these issues. And, of course, the first session, and an important one, will be February 11th at 9 o'clock in the morning out at Keene High School. That's the first of the 2 annual school district meetings.
Correct.
He's Ed Murdough. He's the chairman of the Keene Board of Education, and we fit it all in. Look at that. Not bad for 50 minutes. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Luca will be here. A Monadnock moment. Bill Burns from the Department of Public Works and more. We're Keene's news station, WKBK Keene, where your news is on the way next. Good morning.